according to the theory of evolution, the origin and development of the universe and all its systems can be explained solely on the basis of time, chance, and continuing processes. All living things have arisen from a single-celled organism. A second and opposing worldview is the concept of creation. According to the theory of creation, everything in the universe has come into being through the design, purpose, and deliberate acts of a supernatural creator. That means this creator created the universe, the earth, and all life on earth, including all types of plants and animals, as well as humans.
On today's edition of Origins, we'll discuss the famous astronomer Galileo.
Hello, my friends, and welcome to Origins. My name's Don Chapman. It's my privilege to be your host. You know, Origins is a forum where we take the evidence of science and we use it to confirm the truth of creation. And we do that usually by bringing in some guests who have an area of expertise in the field of science that validates the truth of creation. And today I have a great guest with me. His name is Dr. Jerry Bergman, and Dr. Bergman is a scientist par excellence. He has, I believe you said 9 degrees,
Right.
College and above, and including several PhDs. And he has taught in the field of medicine and in many fields of science. In fact, it says here you've taught biology, genetics, biochemistry, anthropology, geology, and microbiology. That's a good start. Jerry, we're glad you're here today.
It's good to be here.
Jerry will hold the distinction forever of being the first guest on Origins, back with Brother Bixler, and what a great privilege that must be. Today we're going to talk about another great man, a man named Galileo. Not without controversy, the life of Galileo, right?
He had quite a bit of controversy in his life.
Tell me, first of all, just so all our viewers are up to speed, when he lived, what he discovered, what made him the center of attention?
He lived about 400 years ago, and he was considered today one of the greatest scientists that ever lived. He made a lot of discoveries, primarily relating to the telescope and astronomical discoveries. And he did a lot of other work, too, relative to, for example, the pendulum and so on. But he created the most controversy because he had the idea that the Earth is not the center of the solar system, actually the universe at that time. But he concluded the sun was the center of the solar system.
And that was revolutionary in that day.
Well, many were talking about it, but he was the one who really pushed it.
And he became the lightning rod for that whole theory.
That idea, right.
Yeah. And whenever he said that, the rest of the scientific world said, oh, thank you very much, and they all changed their thinking. Is that right?
No, unfortunately, he had a lot of opposition. And unfortunately, the opposition is blamed on the church. In fact, the church, though, had actually a peripheral role in this, which is what I'll talk about today.
That's the key to what we're talking about, is what was the center of the opposition to Galileo when he discovered that the sun was the center of the universe and not the earth?
The main opposition was his colleagues.
Yeah.
And it was not the church, as commonly believed.
And you know, I have to tell you that before I read your notes, I had joined in that assumption. So I'm here to be your student, so go to the board and teach us what you've got for us today. Dr. Jerry.
First, I want to read a few quotes which illustrate the fact that this incident in history is the primary one that's used by atheists and scientists to demean religion as a whole, demean the idea of God. An editorial in Omni, which is a major science magazine, it's out of business now. This is a cover. It was popular for years. I subscribed to it for years, actually. But a quote from Ben Bova, who was the editor then of Omni, he said, "Once religion becomes politically powerful, it suppresses all heretical teachings." Galileo was silenced by the Roman Catholic Church, he concludes. Well, was he? And is this true that once religion becomes powerful, does it suppress all heretical teachings? Robert Heinlein said that 3 decades ago, he said this 3 decades ago, that the United States would be ruled by a religious dictatorship in the 21st century, the century we're in now. And of course, we can see that has not proven to be true. Another example. This is a more recent example. Galileo was branded as a heretic for daring to adopt a radical new theory that the Earth, is not at the center of the universe. Commonly believed by many people, this assumption. And Charles Darwin's great-grandson, this is a quote I like, Matthew Chapman, said, "For supporting Copernican theory, Galileo was tried by the Roman Catholic Church. He was not pardoned until 1988 when Pope John Paul II finally conceded that the Church had made a mistake," blaming, in other words, the whole incident on the Church. Over 3 centuries to concede a scientific point, Chapman says, that every man of reason accepted 200 years ago. Well, this is not true at all.
You know, let me just slow you down for a second, Jerry. I just want to make a couple of comments. First of all, I just want to tell everyone that I am in no way related to Matthew Chapman, Charles Darwin's great-great-grandson, and I want that to be a part of the official record. But secondly, I think what you're presenting to us is so timely, because I have felt just in the last few months much more push in our culture than I ever did before. Maybe I'm just waking up, but an outward, overt push towards making our society so secular that any idea that religion has anything to say or play in our society is wrong. It seems to become the scapegoat of choice for many in the whole scientific and educational community today. Would you agree with that?
Oh, that's a very good point. And I think Galileo is used in order to further this secular goal of making the United States secular. They're trying to say all religion is bad. And they're trying to use this example. And there are certain examples of where religion or religious people have done very poor things. There's no question about that. But my concern is that the Galileo case is actually a bad example, which does not indeed prove what they're trying to.
Well, we're anxious to hear that.
Okay, this is a good quote because it's done by a well-known scientist, New Mexico history of science professor, Timothy Moy. And he was writing in this magazine called Skeptical Inquirer. And in this magazine, he concluded, and I quote because he said in a much better way, much more succinct way than I could ever say what happened historically. And he said, "It's more historically accurate to conclude that the main opponents of the new Copernican position," this is the idea that the Earth is not the center of the solar system, but the Sun is, this is the Copernican position, were academicians teaching science in the universities, and that much, if not most, he says, now this is an agnostic saying this, right, in an atheist agnostic magazine, most of Galileo's support came from church officials. This is far more historically accurate.
But that's not what is usually taught or said, is it?
Not at all. The opposite is what's taught. What's taught is that the church was opposed to Galileo and the academicians were on his side. And in fact, the opposite, by and large, was true. This is a picture of Galileo. And the problem, basically, as Professor Drake says, is that Galileo's ideas were looked upon favorably by certain influential churchmen and scientists, causing jealousy. And that was a lot of the problem among the other scientists. They were jealous of his discoveries that he made.
Human nature raising its ugly head.
That's by and large what it was.
That's
by and large the main problem. And the academic opposition to Galileo was because the natural philosophies that they held at that time were firmly based on Aristotelianism. Aristotle was a great philosopher, and the scientists at that time, unfortunately, put a lot of stock in what he had to say. And the fact is, a lot of what he had to say was wrong. And Galileo contradicted what he had to say.
Aristotle would have believed that the Earth was the center?
Oh, yes, right.
Okay.
And Aristotle also looked at a different way of learning. Galileo stressed we should learn by doing research. We should trust our senses. Aristotle said, no, we should trust reason and not our senses. So they had fundamentally different ways of looking at the universe and learning about the universe. Okay, and as I summarize this here, many scholars did not value experimentation, where Galileo did. He stressed we need to go out and do research. We need to gather data. Where many scientists back then said, no, just reason about what's going on. Okay, and Wallace, he said, for centuries, scholars concluded that the basic truths of nature were to be found in Aristotle's writings. So they relied heavily upon what he had to say. And Galileo contradicted a lot of this. He said, no, Aristotle was wrong. Logical arguments, they said, and reason were more to be trusted than were the evidence of the senses. And this is a well-known historian of science who made this quote in 1955, this statement. And many conclude that Galileo proved the case of heliocentrism. They assume that Galileo had the evidence. But in fact, as Moy points out,
Heliocentrism means
that the Earth is the center of the Sun is geocentrism, and heliocentrism is the opposite, that the Sun is the center of the solar system.
Okay.
And actually, Moy points out correctly that Galileo turned out to be right, but the fact is Galileo did not have the evidence. He didn't have the scientific evidence. His new proof, Galileo's new proof, doesn't work, Moy points out. Galileo simply did not know how to prove that the Earth truly moved, which is what he was trying to prove. So he was right, but he didn't have the evidence, and he didn't know how to prove what he turned out to be right talking about. Galileo had crossed the line set 16 years earlier that he had promised an idea without providing proof of its truthfulness. In other words, to explain what Moy is saying here is that Galileo said that he would only teach heliocentrism as theory, not as fact. And indeed, what happened later on was he crossed the line. He started teaching this as fact. And he should not have taught it as fact because at that time he didn't have the proof. And therefore, he should have taught it as theory, which is what the church wanted him to do. And I should stress the church got involved in this primarily because the scientists were trying to quiet Galileo. How do you quiet your scientific opponent? One way is to get him declared a heretic. If you can get the church on your side against your scientific enemies, you've got your case made. And that's what his scientific peers did. Okay? Many in the church, Moy says, were anxious for new ideas. And the honors it bestowed upon Galileo made his enemies, Galileo's enemies, very, very upset. Furious is what Moy says. They were jealous of the special treatment that Galileo got. He was given special treatment by the church. He had a big salary. He had a raise. He had everything. And they were very upset because of this. So the church, instead of opposing Galileo, was supporting him in many, many, many ways, not only financially, but also in other ways as well. And during a visit to Rome, Galileo had an audience with the Pope. It went really well. He said things are going extremely well. He was overjoyed, according to Ronan's quote here. He was doing very well. The church was on his side. What more could he ask? Galileo. What more could Galileo ask? Galileo's main problem was, according to many historians, was his rash indiscretion, his insistence on throwing open to the common people a question that was far from being settled. So part of it was Galileo's attitude. He upset his scientific colleagues for what many people feel are good reasons. And Moy added that, this is a picture of Dr. Moy, while scholars have been unable to come to a consensus on why Galileo was tried by the Inquisition, there are probably a lot of reasons why. Many of them had to do with politics, and many of them had nothing to do with science. Almost all historians agree, he says, that it was not primarily because Galileo believed in the Copernican heliocentrism. Galileo's trouble with the church became a means to condemn the church as backward. In other words, there were some conflicts that Galileo had with the church. But on the other hand, they distort this to condemn all religion as backward. For most of medieval and Renaissance period, the primary supporter of research and teaching in the science was the church. Dr. Moy correctly
That's a
concludes.
powerful statement.
It is, and Historically, the church has been one of the major supporters of science through much of history. More added at the Galileo Fair, the church continued to promote research. They even turned entire cathedrals into pinhole cameras to measure scientific facts. So they were continually supportive of the science, the church was. And unfortunately today, applying this to today now, unfortunately today, the church all too often sides with the Darwinists. And I think they're going to end up in the main problem, the same problem actually, that they had with Galileo, they're going to end up today. I can see 100 years ago, they'll condemn the church because the church sided with the Darwinists.
You're making quite a jump there, and it's a fascinating one. You're saying that the church ended up on the wrong side. It started out on the right side. It was they weren't the motivator. The motivation was really coming from his, so shall we say, academic competitors,
right,
who were jealous that he was getting the recognition and he was getting the salaries and so forth, and then the church jumped on board with them, and ended up on the wrong side, even though they'd started out on the right side.
Right.
Is that? Am I hearing you?
That's a good summary of what I'm trying to say.
And you're saying now to us that while the church has taught creation since God allowed Moses to write Genesis 1, today when victory is within our grasp, so much of the church is jumping on board with the Darwinists.
Right.
That's a tragedy. You mentioned the Catholic Church there. Why is that singled out up there, Jerry?
Well, they look at other churches as well, but of course the main focus has been against the Catholic Church. But they generally generalize this to all churches. When they say the Catholic Church, they often mean the church. When they say the church, they mean the Lutheran, the Pentecostal, all the churches.
And of course, in Galileo's day, that was the church.
That was right. By far the more
pre-Reformation, so it's all the church.
Yeah.
Okay. Secular Humanist Magazine.
Free Inquirer, this is another important magazine, commonly claim that the Darwinists' strongest allies are the clergy. So even the atheists, Secular Humanist Free Inquirer is primarily atheists and agnostics, even the atheists and agnostics recognize one of the main persons on their side in this struggle, in the Darwinist creationist struggle, is the clergy, which again I think this illustrates that the clergy is again on the wrong side.
Today, most of our clergy are now college and then seminary educated,
right,
and to go through that system, they're going through a system where they're having science teachers, and really the whole world view is from an evolutionary perspective. And so they think to be a part of the educated class, I've got to side with the Darwinists. Is that what you're saying?
That's exactly what I'm saying. That's very, very accurate. And Dr. Mottman said, again, he said it better than I could, many churches and the theologians have great respect for natural scientific conclusions. So if the scientists say we got here through Darwinism, through survival of the fittest, through selecting differences in life caused by mutations, that's how we got here. But holding unwarranted respect for all things scientific is dangerous, Dr. Mottman stresses, and I agree that's true.
What's the danger, Jerry?
The danger is that science has been proved wrong over and over in the past. And when the church sides with science, when they have an unwarranted respect, this doesn't mean they uncritically reject what is said, but I think in many ways the church now worships science. And if science says something, it's true. Even if what science says seems to contradict the Bible, they say, well, the Bible must be wrong, the scientists must be true. So I think in many ways they have an unwarranted respect for all things scientific, even though much which is scientific today, tomorrow will be scientific history.
Folks, we're going to a break right now, but we're in the middle of something very serious here. This huge problem that's facing the church today. Is the church going to end up on the wrong side of the truth? What can we do so that doesn't happen? You stay with me, and Dr. Jerry and I are going to address this when we come back.
Creation versus evolution. You weigh the evidence.
Evolution deception, contradicting confab. Evolutionists say that human beings evolved from simple cells entirely by random chance. But when the word evolving is used with technology, it means improvements that are planned, carefully worked out, and implemented using intelligent guidance. However, when academia uses the word evolution in biology, they shift its meaning to deny any planning or intelligent design. Are you being deceived by evolutionists? Today's guest on Origins, Dr. Jerry Bergman, has been a featured speaker on many college campuses and at professional meetings throughout the United States and Europe. His research has been featured in many publications across the world. Dr. Bergman is also a professor at Northwest State Community College in the state of Ohio, where he has taught biochemistry, anthropology, geology, and microbiology. For more information about our guest, you can write to Dr. Jerry Bergman, Northwest State Community College, 22600 State Route 34, Archbold, Ohio, 43502.
Welcome back, my friends. I'm still here with Dr. Jerry Bergman, and we left on kind of a serious note. We were talking about the fact that there's a grave danger of the church ended up on the wrong side of this whole evolution creation debate. And we had Adolf Hitler's picture up there. Dr. Jerry, what's he got to do with Galileo and us being on the wrong side of this whole thing?
Well, one of my interests is studying the history of the Nazi movement. And I found in studying this that, as I point out up here, that it's no accident that Hitler rose and the Holocaust occurred in a country that had a higher educational level and a greater percentage of PhDs than any other nation in the world. That surprises people.
Yes.
But it's important to note that with few exceptions, academic institutions then supported Hitler's tyranny. He had a high number of PhDs, especially biologists and medical doctors, in support of what he was doing. And so education, unfortunately, does not ensure that one is right. Highly educated people can support causes that are indeed wrong, which, of course, this turned out to be true. And a concern that I've come up with on this is that indoctrination is a major problem academia has. And this is being looked at by more and more people in the world today. Academia often indoctrinates people into a worldview which is anti-Christian.
Yes, it does.
And view, of course, the concern is most often religion. At universities, Larson and Witham said, in universities, the religious people keep their mouths shut and the irreligious people discriminate. And that, I think, is a good summary of what's going on today in many academic institutions. And suppressing minority views in science is still a major problem. This excellent quote here says, in virtually every branch, lectures were proscribed, publication was hampered, professorships were denied, scholars with unpopular ideas sometimes recanted, published anonymously, presented their ideas in weakened forms, or delayed publication for years because of this suppression in science. And the question is, are things worse today? A lot of people assume, well, that was back in Galileo's day there was a problem. Today we have no problems, we have academic freedom. But this quote here from Sir Fred Hoyle, I think summarizes the problem as I see it. The popular belief is that the Copernican revolution and the Inquisition of Galileo are things of the past. He says in this book he wrote, if anything, the situation may have gotten worse today, with the Industrial Revolution conferring upon human beings a degree of arrogance not seen before. So he concludes that intolerance in science today is worse than it was in Galileo's day. And a summary of this, Darwinists have worked hard to gain the support from both sides, the clergy and the common people. And it's unfortunate for science, I point out, it's unfortunate for science that there is so little tolerance for non-Darwinists. And a lot of researchers now have concluded that this is the case. Those who are persecuted today are the non-Darwinists or the anti-Darwinists. Owen Gingerich, for example, a professor at Harvard, he said that scientific censorship remains in our world today, and it may well be far more effective and insidious than in the 17th century during the time of Galileo.
That's quite a quote.
It is very, very telling. This is a professor at Harvard who just retired, by the way, not too long ago. And what people who oppose Darwin are saying is we simply want a place at the table. A lot of people say, well, you want to take over the schools. No, we simply want to be able to present our ideas at the colleges and universities. The scientists have become the new priesthood of truth. And what we want now is simply to be able to be part of the research community, presenting our ideas in the research community.
Dr. Jerry, you've given us an awful lot to think about. Is there an opportunity for people with a Christian worldview in this country founded by people with a Christian worldview to bring the truth of a creator to the table and to the discussion? Or is there really an academic bias that has become censorship? Are we in worse shape today than we really were even in Galileo's day? Something for you to really think about. I want to thank Dr. Bergman for being with us today. And I want to remind you that it's still God's view that He created you. And that should be your worldview too. God bless you until next time.
Thank you for watching this edition of Origins. If you'd like a copy of the PowerPoint information presented today, you can download a PDF file of program number 505 from our website at www.originstv.org. Or for a DVD of this series, send a $12 donation to cover shipping and handling and write to Origins program number 505, Cornerstone Television, Wall, Pennsylvania 15148.
Origins is made possible by the faithful prayers and the financial support of you, our Cornerstone Television family.